It's your Catholic Drive Time
with Joe McLean and Emily Alcaraz.
All right, joining us right now by phone, all the way from sunny California, where it never snows or ices or gets below 72 degrees, according to their state legislation, is Norbertine Father Sebastian Walshe. Good morning to you, Father. Thank you for being on the program.
Absolutely. It's good to be here, Joe.
You have a book out, Father, called Always Catholic, How to Keep Your Kids in the Faith for Life and Bring Them Back If They Strayed. I got to tell you, Father, here at the Catholic Radio Apostolate Guadalupe Radio Network, we hear from listeners all the time. And one of the number one prayer requests we get, by far, is pray for my lost children who've left the faith. That is such a common prayer. What motivated you to write this book in particular? I think it's published by Catholic Answers, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. It's published by Catholic Answers. Well, there's a parish I help out at on Sundays in San Clemente called Our Lady of Fatima. And once a month, at least before the pandemic happened, once a month I would have a question and answer after Mass, just an open form question and answer for the parishioners that come to ask any questions about the Catholic faith. It was an opportunity, to catechize and then, allow the faithful to get more than they could get just in, an ordinary homily. And the number one question I had was, how do I keep my kids Catholic, or how do I help my kids who have strayed from the faith come back? And it was such a common question, and I had to so often give advice and then ask particular questions about the state of their child or whatever, and then give advice on that I started giving talks on the matter just in general. And one of the apologists from Catholic Answers was at that talk, one of the talks, and he said, why don't you write a book for this? So that's what I did, and it really does seem to fill a great need among the Catholic faithful, especially parents.
Father Sebastian Walshe from the Norbertines is our guest today. Now, I understand that this is a common prayer, as we just talked about, but I think, in my experience, Father, having talked to a lot of parents over the years, Catholic parents, I think one of the things that they run into is the pressure in society to rush their kids off to college in particular, but let's say rush their kids off into society. And maybe those kids aren't prepared to stand on their own two ground, whether it's peer pressures or just life in general or what have you. How do you see that? Are parents rushing their kids too quickly into the great world on their own?
Well, one of the points I make in the book is that the children's generation today is completely different than their parents' generation was, and which is much different than their parents' generation was. And so we have this idea that, the educational system is more or less faith neutral, and our kids, we just put them out there, and as long as we gave them the good foundation, in K through 12 or something like that therefore they're going to be fine sailing the rest of their life. They can go wherever they want, for college, because the world is more or less, the educational system is more or less faith neutral. Or if you send them to a Catholic college, you would hope that would support their faith. Well, that's been, in fact, the opposite of the truth. When you actually go and you see what's being taught in these universities, and even ones that go by the name Catholic, many, I should say, what you find is they're positively designed, the educational system, to dismantle the faith. And usually someone who's had an education in the faith up to 12th grade is in no position to really answer the objections of people who are, much older than them and who have, studied this in a way to really try and raise objections to the faith that your kids wouldn't be able to handle. And then, besides that, there's a social pressure of the vast number of other children who are not from Catholic backgrounds, who are raised just in the society as a whole, and who are basically saying, I see the Catholic Church as the largest institution of injustice in the world. That's how, very many non-Catholic young people come to college, and so young Catholic people are getting it from all sides. And so one of the points I make is, not only do you have to be careful about their education, getting up to 12th grade and knowing they get an authentic Catholic education there, but you also have to make sure that if they go to a college, that they go to some place that's not going to dismantle their faith. And preferably they would go to a really good Catholic college where they know how to educate kids in such a way that they'll be able to stand on their own 2 feet, and then from there, go on to somewhere else. But you can't just, count on the fact that, a Catholic college is going to do that for you. Even back in the 50s, I mentioned in my book, my dad went to Notre Dame, got his faith dismantled at Notre Dame.
Wow.
In the 1950s. They told him there's no hell. They told him there's no devil. They told him the only thing you need to do to be saved is to feed the poor. And, that my dad, suffered from that for years, decades after his time at Notre Dame. And this is in the mid-1950s. So Catholic parents need to open their eyes. And I give a whole list of ways of identifying an authentic Catholic educational institution from one that's false as part of the one of the chapters of my book.
Now, Father Walshe, Emily here. I actually, I went to Catholic school my entire life, so I can attest to the fact that it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to stay in the church, because I left the church briefly for a while. But my parents were very steadfast in their faith. They continue to pray for me. But in the world today, there's so many things that you mentioned in your book that are tempting and luring children away from the church. In a material sense, there are the transitory pleasures, you mentioned sex and that, sinful things like that. But then there's also philosophies, political philosophies, relativism. We have to go to a break right now, but afterwards, I'd like to hear what you think is the biggest threat to children losing their faith today. Right. I wanted to know what you think the biggest potential threat is to children losing their faith.
Great. Well, I'm going to answer that question in 2 ways, because there's really 2 ways that children end up leaving the faith. One is the way that you did, and that is where a child will temporarily leave the faith for a time, and then they'll come back after a few years or something like that, after kind of a few years of straying. And then there's a more long-term, departure from the faith that often, takes decades to heal. The first kind of departure from the faith that's shorter and easier to cure are usually due to things that you mentioned, namely difficulties with regard to just understanding how the Catholic Church is not, a cause of injustice or error or just ridiculous or things like that. I make a big point at the beginning of my book of saying, look, the main reason why your children will stay Catholic and want to stay Catholic is because they'll see the connection between being Catholic and being happy. If they see that connection, they'll never leave the faith. But one of the reasons they cease to see that connection is because they think some essential aspects of the faith are false. And so they'll leave because they hear different worldly philosophies. They're immersed in the world and in a very anti-Catholic world environment that supplies young people with all sorts of arguments from the time they're little kids. So that's the first reason. I'll say something about the antidote for that in a minute. The second reason, which is why children leave the faith for more long term, at least in my experience, is there's deeper family of origin issues. There's problems at the level of the relationship of the parents to each other and to the children. And very often you'll get something like this. You'll have maybe one parent who's very devout and the other one who's not. And the parent who's devout will often be trying to protect the child from the non-devout parent. For example, the mother will be trying to protect the child from the father and saying, don't be like your father, he's this and that, and he doesn't practice his faith. And what they see is the Catholic spouse, or the one who's more devout anyway, constantly criticizing the other one. Now, a child receives this as saying, the Catholic faith drives a wedge between my parents. Why do I want that faith? And so the children in families like that, they don't want anything to do with the Catholic faith because they associate it with a broken family. And that's the last thing they want for their lives. And so they just go their own way, and it takes sometimes decades for them to come back and realize that wasn't really it, but it sure seemed like it from their perspective when they were young. So real quickly, what's an antidote for the first and the second? The antidote for the first is parents need to be much more vigilant than they are over what their children take in. I think it's crazy, for example, for parents to be giving smartphones to teenagers. And that may be very unpopular in the modern world, but I'm sorry, Jesus was also unpopular. The fact of the matter is your children are being exposed to things you have no idea about on the internet, and there's no way that they should be exposed to those sort of things without you being able to help them, okay? Also, their friends. Who are their friends, and who are they spending time with, etc.? Where are they going to school? Those are things that parents should have an open conversation with their kids about and not be afraid to say, no, we're going to take you out of this environment. It's dangerous for you. With regard to the first, the real difficulty there is that the parent who's devout needs to recognize the Catholic faith teaches that the believing husband sanctifies the unbelieving wife, and the believing wife sanctifies the unbelieving husband. And that means that the Catholic faith teaches us to be more attentive, loving, faithful, affectionate towards the non-believing spouse or the less devout spouse because of our Catholic faith. And the children need to see mom or dad love their other parent even more because they're Catholic, not that they're trying to distance themselves from them.
We're talking with Father Sebastian Walshe from the Norbertines about his book, Always Catholic, How to Keep Your Kids in the Faith for Life and Bring Them Back If They Have Strayed. Now, Father, as you were talking there, there's a joke at my house that's a long-running joke. It's the things I will never regret while lying on my deathbed. In fact, I'm giving this very talk at the Virtual Catholic Men's Conference coming up. I think it's next weekend on the 19th. But I've given this very talk on a couple of occasions. Things I will never regret on my deathbed. Not giving them more time on the internet. I won't regret that. And not letting them play more video games. You're not going to get me to regret that on my deathbed. Not letting them have access to the latest and greatest devices or things or entertainment just because Johnny has them. I'm never going to regret these things. Cutting the cable television out of our house over a decade ago now, it seems. It was a smart decision for my wife and I. Not only because I was addicted to it, but because they were going to be addicted to it. But that's a tough pill to swallow for families, Father. How do you get families to accept this hard truth?
Well, one of the things I point out is social media, television, internet. Most people use those things as emotional anesthesia, and most people will be willing to admit that. In other words, they're bored, they're sad, they don't want to have to deal with difficult things in their life, so they just go online, or they just go and they sit in front of the television to just make it go away. And once people recognize, hey, why am I watching television? Why am I sitting for hours on the internet? And the answer is emotional anesthesia. I'm just trying to take the pain away. Well, what would a doctor say if you had a bad, pain in your leg and you just kept on taking a bunch of painkiller and not addressing the problem? I think a doctor would tell you, stop taking the anesthesia. It's making you ignore something that's a real problem. You have to address this problem. And I say the same thing to parents out there. Don't just take the easy way out. You have to address real problems, and you have to talk them through, and you have to have a healthy family, not an anesthetized family. Okay? So once people recognize that, and I think most people are willing to admit, yeah, that's why I'm doing it, and that's maybe why my kids are doing it, then you can sit down and say, we need a healthy family, we need healthy relationships, we need healthy conversations, we need to ask forgiveness and give forgiveness, we need to change our lives for things so that we actually enjoy just being around each other and talking to each other. Those sort of things go a long way in fixing this problem.
Now, most parents today have not been very well catechized. That's just something that the church has been struggling with for a while. What would you say to parents who feel that they're not capable of teaching the full truths and theology of our tradition to their children?
Yeah, well, the failure in catechesis, as you mentioned, goes way back, and so most parents are actually living under the consequences of that failure. Our grandparents, probably were, much, much better educated than our parents, that sort of thing. So, fortunately, there's one thing that the internet does provide, and that is access to excellent catechetical tools, right? I point out Catholic Answers is an excellent resource for people. I recommend to everyone, if you don't have a catechism in the Catholic Church, the edition put out under St. John Paul II, if you don't have one in your home, you need to have one in your home, so that you have that. One of the things I recommend when you're starting with young children is that you go through, like at the breakfast table, you have a nice conversation at breakfast, and you read a little section of the catechism, with your kids every single day, whether it's a nice the old Baltimore catechism or another one, or even the big catechism. You read a little section every day for breakfast, and you talk to your kids about it, and you do that for years, and you get through the whole catechism. So we have excellent resources today that didn't exist before, and the only reason someone's badly catechized today is because they haven't put the effort forth. You can find excellent catechesis. Make sure that it's not posing as Catholic when it's not, right? Make sure it's got either, an imprimatur from the Holy See, where it's, you're talking about something that's issued by the Holy See, or that it's from a very reputable Catholic source like Catholic Answers or another good Catholic source like that.
Now, Father Walshe, we have a question from the audience right now.
But you only have 2 minutes to go.
Patty on Facebook.
I can do it. I'll do it.
Patty on Facebook says, how can you help grandkids when the parents aren't actively involved in the church and the kids don't want the interference?
Yeah, that's a difficult thing with many grandparents, like I said, are better educated than their own children are. So in a case like this, the best thing you can do is recognize first, it's not your place to replace their parents. Their parents have a natural right to educate their own children, and it's not your place to take over for the parents, okay? And that's really important, because when children see their grandparents interfering in their parents' rights, then it makes them want the Catholic faith less, right? Instead, the role of grandparents there is, first of all, with their own children, to show them how being a Catholic helped them to stay together, to love one another, to be happier, to get through the trials and difficulties of life. And then also to the grandchildren, if you're having any struggles, let me know. And then offering third, to pray with them. If there's one thing that helps keep families together, it's prayer, especially saying the rosary every day and daily mass. And if you invite your children and grandchildren to pray without any pressure, then at the very least they'll know that Grandma and Grandpa are people of prayer, and that makes them better people.
All right. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Well done. You got it done in time. Father Sebastian Walshe from the Norbertines. His book is Always a Catholic, How to Keep Your Kids in the Faith for Life and Bring Them Back If They Have Strayed. It comes out on Monday from Catholic Answers. We've linked to it at facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time. Thank you, Father Walshe, for your time today. We're very grateful to you.
You're most welcome. Thanks so much, Joe and Emily. God bless you.
God bless you. God love you. Have a great weekend, Father. That's going to do it for the first hour, but more Catholic Drive Time is coming your way. If you can join us across the GRN or on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, just search for us there at GRN Online. We're giving out prizes today for the game show. All that coming up next. God love you.
Thank you for joining us on Your Catholic Drive Time, where it is our pleasure to keep you informed and inspired.
Join us Monday through Friday at the same time, right here on your favorite Catholic radio station.
Don't forget to connect with us. Just go to facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time.
Again, that's facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time.
Be sure to share more than just us today. Share Jesus with everyone you meet.
Bye now, and God love you.